I ruined my daughter's dream to save her life, but now the people who took her are offering her a better future if I confess to a crime I didn't commit. The silence in the kitchen that morning was thick enough to choke on. Sunlight, usually a cheerful intruder, felt judgmental as it slanted across the polished oak table. Across from me sat my daughter, Alara, her face a mask of betrayal that made the knot in my stomach tighten into iron. She was 17, vibrant, on the cusp of everything, and right now she looked at me like I was a monster wearing her father's skin. "Cruelty," she whispered, the word brittle, shattering the quiet. "That's what this is, Dad, pure, unforgivable cruelty." I didn't flinch, though every nerve ending screamed in protest. I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head over the last 6 months, played out every possible trajectory, every raw, wounded outburst. Yet, hearing it spoken aloud, directed at me by the only person who truly mattered, was like being stabbed with a familiar, perfectly weighted knife. "Alara, please," I started, reaching out, but she snatched her hand back as if my touch would burn her. "Don't," she spat. "Just don't patronize me. You pulled the funding. Just like that. Last week, I had the acceptance letter from Juilliard, a full scholarship pending the final portfolio review, and you just yanked the strings." The Juilliard acceptance. That was the linchpin, the beautiful, agonizing centerpiece of this entire charade. I had orchestrated its sudden evaporation with surgical precision. The tuition waivers, the housing grants, the promised mentorship. I had contacted the financial aid office, the admissions director, my own former professor who had been her champion, and I had systematically dismantled the entire scaffolding of her future dream. I told them I could no longer afford the living expenses, the supplemental costs, the travel. I told them my business was failing catastrophically. The lies tasted like ash, but they were necessary fuel. "Your business is failing, Alara. You saw the quarterly reports. You know we can't sustain the move to New York right now. It was irresponsible of me to even let you believe we could," I lied, letting my voice crack just enough to sound defeated, not calculating. Her eyes, the same startling emerald green as her mother's, flooded with unshed tears. "That's not true. You just signed that massive contract last month, the one for the Sinclair merger. You told me yourself that secured us for the next 5 years. You were ecstatic." She had an excellent memory, too good. She remembered details I'd forgotten, details that now acted as perfect anchors for her narrative of my sudden, inexplicable parental sabotage. "Things change, sweetheart, fast. The Sinclair deal hit a snag, a massive regulatory hurdle. It's all tied up in litigation now. We might lose everything." I kept my gaze steady, projecting the image of a broken man scrambling to save his failing empire. An empire that, ironically, was stronger than ever, generating more passive income than I could spend. "So what? You just decide that my future is collateral damage? You decide that instead of downsizing, instead of selling the vacation house, you'll sacrifice my one shot at being a dancer. How could you do this to me, Mark?" She used my first name, a subtle shift that stung worse than any insult. In her eyes, I was no longer her father. I was just Mark, a careless adult who had broken a promise. I leaned back, allowing the performance of exhaustion to settle over me. I knew if I explained the truth now, the truth about the anonymous threats, the predatory investment firms circling our assets like vultures, the desperate need to make myself look financially ruined so they would move on to easier prey. She would never believe me. She would only see the intricate web of lies I'd spun today. I needed her anger to be focused, pure, and directed away from me, but outward toward the unfairness of the world, not inward towards my protective actions. "I'm sorry, Alara," I managed, my voice low and rough. "It's the only way I could see to secure something for you. Just hold on. Give me time." "Time for what? For you to sell the house and move us into a cramped apartment downtown? For me to attend community college and practice in the garage? That's not securing my future, Dad. That's crushing my spirit." She pushed back her chair with a violent scrape. "I can't even look at you right now. I'm going to Sarah's. Don't follow me." She grabbed her jacket and slammed the front door with such force that the crystal vase on the entryway table rattled precariously. I listened to her footsteps pound down the driveway, the sound fading until there was only the oppressive quiet again. I closed my eyes, picturing the file on my secured laptop, the one detailing the operation. The whole plan hinged on her believing this bankruptcy, this failure, was real. I walked to the window, watching the spot where she disappeared. The crucial next step was in motion. The anonymous threat that had forced this drastic maneuver wasn't going to wait for her to cool down. In fact, it was scheduled to arrive precisely at 8 p.m. tonight. A digital time bomb designed to look like a devastating data breach coinciding with my fabricated financial collapse. If the threat actors believed my story, that I was ruined and fleeing the country, they would leave Alara alone. They had made that crystal clear. They wanted my holdings, not my family, but they needed proof I was sufficiently neutralized. I pulled out my phone, checking the secure communication app. The contact, Oracle, had confirmed the final phase initiation sequence. I had only until 8 o'clock to ensure my own digital footprint looked utterly destroyed, to make the fall look complete and irreversible. I opened the first encrypted folder, confirming the transfer of the last remaining liquid assets into the offshore, untraceable accounts, the ones meant only for Alara's education when the danger had passed, years down the line. Just as my thumb hovered over the execute wipe command for my main server, my secondary phone, the burner I kept hidden in the safe, began to ring. It wasn't Oracle. The incoming number was unlisted, untraceable, and entirely unexpected. My blood ran cold. I answered on the third ring, my voice a low hiss. "Who is this?" The voice on the other end was distorted, digitized but undeniably female, laced with a sharp, cold intelligence. The Sinclair merger didn't hit a snag mark. It was intercepted. "And we know you moved the funds. Your daughter is not your only leverage." Then, before I could even draw a breath to ask what she meant, the voice added, "We're picking her up from Sarah's house in 20 minutes. You have 1 hour to transfer everything to our account, or she pays the price for your lies." The digital rasp of her voice echoed in the sudden vacuum of my carefully constructed reality. 20 minutes. My stomach dropped out from under me. The carefully rehearsed calm I'd maintained dissolving into raw, frantic panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. The entire premise of Operation Phoenix, the elaborate financial self-immolation, was to make me invisible, broke, and uninteresting to the predators who'd been circling my company for months. They wanted the merger's valuation, and their intel suggested I'd kept a significant portion of liquid assets liquid. My plan was to show them the vault was empty tonight, making me a non-threat by the time they made their move tomorrow morning. But this unknown player, this woman, knew about the Sinclair deal being intercepted, not just stalled. And she knew about the offshore transfer. Someone had blown the cover on the entire contingency plan. "Who is this?" I repeated, my voice sharper this time. the calculated weakness gone, replaced by the steel edge of a father facing an imminent threat to his child. I moved away from the window, retreating to the reinforced study where my main server hummed, my last bastion of control. The identity of the messenger is irrelevant, Mark. You've wasted our time and money with your pathetic shell game, the distorted voice hissed. You think a fake bankruptcy scares us? We don't want your company. We want access. Access you gain through the Sinclair board. Now, your access point, your daughter, is coming to us. 1 hour. Full transfer of the untraceable accounts. No cops. No funny business. Or we start sending you pictures. The threat was immediate, visceral, and far more dangerous than the corporate espionage I was trying to outrun. The original antagonists, the shadow investors who wanted to leverage my proprietary encryption algorithms, were ruthless, but they dealt in money and data, not kidnapping. This voice belonged to someone else, someone who had been waiting in the wings, watching my defensive maneuvers. I slammed my hand onto the desk, sending a pen skittering across the floor. Alara was at Sarah Jenkins' house. Sarah's parents were out of town for the weekend at a medical conference. It was the perfect, isolated target. I glanced at the clock on my monitor. 5:45 p.m. 55 minutes until the deadline she'd set. My training kicked in, overriding the primal scream of fear. I had access codes, countermeasures, and a house designed for siege, not just comfort. But I couldn't use any of it without alerting the real threat that I knew they were coming, which would escalate the danger to Alara immediately. If I called the police, the kidnappers would simply vanish and dispose of her. If I initiated the automated security lockdown, they would know I was prepared and might accelerate their timeline. I needed leverage, and the only leverage I had was the very data I'd been trying to hide. The Oracle connection. I typed furiously, bypassing the main security suite and accessing the encrypted channel reserved for emergency communication with my security consultant, the one who specialized in deep cover extraction and counterintelligence. I didn't use my voice. I typed a single urgent message. Hostile intervention. Targets aware of contingency fund transfer. Alara compromised. Need eyes on Sarah Jenkins' residence. Now. The reply was instantaneous, appearing in stark white text on the black screen. Confirmed. Deploying Phantom Team. ETA 15 minutes. Do not engage hostiles until extraction is confirmed. If they suspect surveillance, the risk profile triples. 15 minutes. That left only 40 minutes before the clock ran out, and 15 agonizing minutes before my elite security detail could even get eyes on the location. I had to buy time. I picked up the burner phone again, my fingers slick with sweat, and dialed the number the kidnapper had used. It rang twice before she picked up, her digital voice still unnervingly steady. You're wasting time, Mark. The transfer must begin. Wait, I managed, forcing a tremor into my voice that was partly real. You don't understand. The funds aren't easily moved. They're locked in multi-factor authentication protocols. It will take longer than an hour to breach the initial layers without triggering a freeze. Lies, she snapped. We watched you set up the secondary relays last night. Don't patronize me with technical jargon. We know you can access it. I can, I conceded, leaning into the performance. But if I rush the firewall, the secondary system, the one my late wife set up, will trigger a full asset dispersal to anonymous charities. It's a fail-safe. You'll get nothing. This was the improvisation, a desperate gamble woven from the threads of my actual security architecture. I had built that secondary fail-safe years ago, a petty, vengeful measure against potential corporate raiders who might try to seize my assets posthumously. I'd forgotten it existed until this moment. If it worked, it might buy me another 2 hours, maybe 3, while they tried to bypass that separate, esoteric layer of encryption. "How long precisely?" she demanded, the digital quality wavering slightly, betraying a flicker of uncertainty. 2 hours to safely navigate the dispersal protocols without losing the core capital, I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. I need the extra time to decrypt the final access key without triggering the charity dump. I'll start the transfer now, but it will be slow. You watch the network feeds. If you see the charity dispersal signal, you'll know I've been lying. There was a pause on the line, a tense, grinding silence that stretched the minutes into eons. I imagined her team watching their monitors, scanning for the digital signature of the charity dump protocol activating. Finally, the voice returned, colder than before. 1 hour for initial transfer. You have until 7 p.m. to show 50% movement, or the process stops, and we move to phase 2. And Mark? Yes. Don't try to run. We know where you are. We can hear your server humming. She hung up. I stared at the burner phone, the screen now dark, reflecting my own ashen face. 7 p.m. That gave me just over an hour, but it bought me time against the initial kidnapping deadline. The Phantom team was due in 20 minutes, but they were only observers. They wouldn't move until they had visual confirmation of Alara leaving with an unauthorized party. My own security detail was still too far away. I had to do something immediate to protect the house itself, just in case the other threat, the one that knew about the offshore accounts, decided to skip the kidnapping and just silence me here. I rushed to the server room, my mind racing through emergency protocols. I hit the silent alarm, locking down the exterior perimeter, a necessary risk as the kidnappers might see the sudden status change, and initiated the scorched earth sequence on my primary business drives. I needed to look utterly destroyed by 7 p.m. As the progress bar on the data wipe crept agonizingly slowly across the screen, my personal cell phone buzzed. It was Alara. A text message, sent just moments ago, from Sarah's shared Wi-Fi network. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have yelled. I just need a hug. I'm coming back now. Can you open the door?" My breath hitched. She was coming home. In 10 minutes, maybe less. If she walked through that door now, she'd be walking into a house that was actively locking down, potentially confirming to the external threat that I was panicking and exposed. Worse, if the kidnappers were watching her phone signal and saw her reroute back to the house, they would realize my time-buying story was a bluff, and they would accelerate their timeline, perhaps even dispatching their own people to intercept her before my Phantom team arrived. I typed a frantic reply, trying to sound casual while screaming internally, "Stay there, I'm sick, don't come home." The reply came back instantly. "Too late. I see your car in the driveway, opening the gate now." My blood ran cold as I heard the distinct mechanical groan of the automated perimeter gate swinging open, miles away from the house, triggered by Alara's return. I looked at the server screen. Data wipe at 40%. Time until Phantom arrival, 12 minutes. Time until Alara arrived, maybe 5 minutes. And then, over the intercom system, which was supposed to only connect to the security hub, I heard a new sound, a low, grinding scrape against the metal of the front door, followed by the distinct sound of a high-powered thermal lance starting to cut through the reinforced steel, a sound that signaled someone was already here, bypassing my lockdown entirely. They hadn't waited for 7 p.m. They hadn't waited for her to get home. They were here now. The sound of the thermal lance was a monstrous, hungry scream tearing through the silence of the study. It wasn't the sound of a professional extraction team. It was the sound of brute, impatient force being applied directly to my defenses. The realization hit me with paralyzing clarity. The voice on the phone hadn't been bluffing about being close. They were already on the property, likely observing Alara's return and using her arrival as the perfect distraction to breach the house before my security detail could mobilize. The data wipe froze at 42%. I couldn't risk the system crashing mid-process. I had seconds to decide: confront the immediate threat at the door or protect the only asset that mattered, the proof of my supposed ruin on the server. I slammed the emergency override button for the server room's internal lockdown, sacrificing the main line of defense, but sealing the server rack itself behind 3 inches of hardened titanium alloy. It would slow them down inside the house, but it wouldn't stop them for long. I spun around, grabbing the only thing in the study that remotely qualified as a weapon: a heavy, antique brass telescope I'd inherited from my grandfather. It felt pitifully inadequate against whatever industrial tools they were using on the front door, but adrenaline flooded my system, sharpening my focus. I crept out of the study, moving silently toward the main hall where the thermal screaming was loudest. The house was large, rambling, built on angles that created confusing echoes. I needed to intercept them before they breached the inner hallway leading to Alara's preferred sanctuary, the conservatory, which had reinforced glass, but only standard locks. As I reached the corner archway overlooking the front entrance foyer, the thermal noise abruptly ceased, replaced by the sound of stressed metal groaning under immense pressure. Then, a heavy thud, the sound of a large reinforced door being violently kicked inward, followed by the muffled shouts of at least 2 heavily armed individuals entering the house. They weren't silent operators. They were mercenaries making noise, suggesting their primary objective was intimidation and speed, not stealth. This meant they were likely hired muscle, working for the voice on the phone who clearly had more sophisticated intelligence than they possessed. I flattened myself against the cold marble wall, peering around the edge. 2 figures in dark tactical gear stood in the foyer. They wore no distinguishing marks, only featureless black helmets that completely obscured their faces. They were moving with practiced efficiency, sweeping the downstairs rooms with high-powered flashlights. "Check the study first. Boss wants confirmation on the server wipe status," one barked into his comm system. They hadn't seen Alara yet. They were prioritizing the financial evidence, confirming the foundation of my desperate ruse. If they found the server intact or saw the wipe incomplete, they would know I was actively fighting back, and they would eliminate me immediately before moving on to Alara. I had to create a diversion, and fast. My mind flashed back to the house's archaic central vacuum system, a beast of industrial piping installed when the house was built in the 1920s. It had a manual bypass switch located in the laundry room, right off the kitchen. If I rerouted the suction intake to the main ventilation shaft near the foyer, I backed away silently, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and slipped down the back hall toward the laundry room. The sound of heavy boots tracking across the hardwood floors was getting closer. They were moving through the living room, heading toward the study. I found the old metal panel for the vacuum bypass, yanked it open, and flipped the heavy switch labeled "Main to Ventilation." I then raced to the utility closet, grabbed a handful of dried potpourri, the cheap, heavy kind, and stuffed it into the intake nozzle. I raced back toward the archway just in time to hear the tactical team breach the study door. A series of quick, frustrated curses followed. Then one of the mercenaries shouted, "It's locked down! Firewall is active! He's stalling us!" That was my cue. I hit the main suction switch on the laundry room wall. The house groaned. The vacuum system roared to life, not with the gentle hum of home cleaning, but with a deep, guttural, industrial pull. A moment later, the potpourri mixed with a cloud of ancient dust, insulation fibers, and disturbed cobwebs erupted from the vents directly above the mercenaries in the foyer, creating a choking, blinding, localized smog cloud that smelled like forgotten attics. "What the hell is that?" one shouted, coughing violently. "It's a trap. Sweep the rest of the ground floor. He's making a break for the back exit." They began backing out of the study, coughing and swinging their weapons blindly into the swirling dust. This was my window. I bolted from my hiding spot, sprinted past the choking figures, and took the stairs 2 at a time, heading for the second floor, the only place Alara might have retreated to. I found the conservatory door slightly ajar. "Ilara!" I hissed, pushing it open. The room was empty. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the twilight garden, but no sign of my daughter. Panic surged, sharper and colder than before. She wasn't here. She must have heard the front door breach and fled deeper into the house, or worse, panicked and run out the back garden gate. Then I saw it. On the polished stone floor near the ornate bird cage she used for her rescue parakeets was a single, small, silver charm, a stylized infinity knot that had broken off the bracelet I bought her for her 16th birthday. It was a marker. She had been here. My eyes scanned the high arch ceiling where the heavy ivy lattice grew around the structural beams. There, tucked almost invisibly against the dark wood, was a small, almost invisible smudge of white chalk, a barely visible directional arrow pointing not toward the attic, but down toward the floorboards beneath the center seating bench. I lunged for the heavy velvet cushion, ripping it aside. There was a nearly invisible seam in the flooring, outlined by a faint scratch mark. It wasn't a simple trapdoor. It was a pressure release panel. As I frantically searched for the trigger mechanism, I heard heavy footsteps thundering up the main staircase below. They had cleared the ground floor chaos. They were coming for the second floor, and they knew she was on this level. I fumbled desperately with the seam, my fingers brushing against a barely perceptible indentation. I pressed it hard. With a quiet hiss of released air, a narrow, black opening appeared in the floor, revealing a short drop into absolute darkness. "She's up here! Conservatory!" A voice yelled from the bottom of the stairs. I had seconds. I looked down into the black void, then back at the staircase, where the shadows of the first tactical operator were beginning to coalesce into solid, armed figures. I couldn't get down there without being seen. Just as I was about to drop in, my peripheral vision caught movement outside the glass. Not the tactical team. This was different. A sleek black drone, no larger than a large bird, hovered silently outside the conservatory glass, its single red optical lens focused directly on me. And then, through the drone's external speaker, a voice, the distorted voice of the woman, spoke, not through the house comms but directly outside, crystal clear against the gathering darkness. "Don't bother hiding her, Mark. We already took the bait. She isn't in the house. She never left Sarah's. We just wanted to see where you would run." The revelation hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. She never left Sarah's. The entire frantic sequence inside the house, the noise, the dust cloud, the false trail leading to the conservatory, had been orchestrated not to save Alara from the intruders, but to distract me while the real extraction happened elsewhere. The silver charm, the chalk mark, the secret floor panel, all elaborate stage dressing designed to look like a desperate father protecting his child inside the known battle zone. I stared at the drone hovering inches from the glass, its single red eye an accusatory beacon in the encroaching night. The woman's voice, mocking and triumphant, resonated from its tiny speaker. "We just wanted to see where you would run." The tactical team, now fully aware they had been following a decoy trail inside the house, stopped their ascent on the stairs. I could hear their confusion turn to fury as they looked around the empty conservatory. They realized their mission had shifted from security neutralization to retrieval, and they were now reporting back to their employer that the asset was already secured. "Phantom Team, abort secondary sweep. Target asset has been secured at primary location," the mercenary leader bellowed into his comms, anger radiating off him even through the static. My only priority was now the offshore accounts, the true leverage, and getting word to my real security team, the Phantom Group, that they were converging on the wrong location. I spun away from the drone and sprinted back toward the study. The mercenaries, realizing they had been played, were now ignoring the vacuum distraction and moving with deadly purpose toward the server room, intent on confirming the status of the digital transfer before their boss realized the entire operation was compromised. I burst back into the study. The heavy titanium door of the server rack still held, but the metal around the reinforced hinges was beginning to glow faintly orange under a sustained assault. They were using a plasma torch now. They weren't interested in hacking. They were interested in physical destruction to get to the hardware and force my hand. My fingers flew across the keyboard of my auxiliary terminal, accessing the private channel to Oracle. I didn't bother typing a sophisticated message. I punched in the Universal Emergency Override code, the one designed to signal the collapse of the entire protective structure. Code read, "Asset lost. Initiate scorched earth. Release proxy data." This was the ultimate insurance policy. If Alara was truly gone, the only thing left to do was detonate the entire corporate war chest I had built to protect her future, unleashing a torrent of proprietary, legally devastating data onto the global markets, information that would bankrupt every single entity connected to the consortium that had been threatening me. It would be corporate Armageddon, but it would ensure that the people who took Alara would spend the next decade fighting regulatory fires instead of chasing liquidity. The system recognized the code. A single prompt flashed on the screen. "Confirm deployment of proxy data packet 1/N." I looked toward the door, hearing the screeching whine of the plasma torch intensifying. They were almost through. If I hit Y, the data would start deploying in less than a minute, flooding servers across 3 continents. It was a suicide button for my legitimate business, but a potential lifeline for Alara. Just as my finger hovered over the wide key, my primary cell phone, the one I thought was safely powered down, vibrated violently on the desk. It wasn't a text or a call. It was a single, high-resolution photograph. The photo was clear, taken in a dimly lit, expensive-looking room. Alara was sitting in a plush armchair, looking pale but unharmed, sipping tea. She looked calm. And seated across from her, illuminated by a soft lamp, was an older woman with severe silver-streaked hair, holding a thick file. But the shock wasn't Alara's composure. It was the file the woman was holding. Etched faintly onto the leather binding were the embossed letters, "Juilliard School for the Arts, Board of Governors," and underneath the photo, a new message from the same distorted number. We didn't take her to hurt her, Mark. We took her to enroll her. She's meeting her new mentor now. You kept telling her the money was gone. We offered her a lifeline, debt-free, on the condition you cooperate fully with our data release. Your choice. Save your data or secure her new future. Tell us, Mark. Do you destroy your legacy, or do you sacrifice your freedom to ensure she gets what you supposedly couldn't afford? The photograph was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, hitting the precise weak point I had spent months reinforcing. Ilara's desperate, clawing ambition for Juilliard. It wasn't a threat of violence, it was a threat of opportunity, twisted into a moral dilemma aimed directly at my deepest fear, that my protective actions would ultimately deny her the one thing she dreamed of. The plasma torch roared, the metal hinges of the server rack beginning to buckle inward with a sickening squeal. I had seconds before they accessed the hardware, seconds before they could confirm the true state of my finances, rendering my entire fabricated bankruptcy a meaningless exercise. I stared at the screen. Confirm deployment of proxy data packet 1, Y/N. If I hit Y, the data unleashed would cause chaos, alerting every government agency and regulatory body to the vast network of corruption I was trying to expose. It would guarantee I would be hunted by shadowy figures for the rest of my life, but it might draw enough official scrutiny to force the Board of Governors to release Ilara immediately, fearing association with kidnappers. If I didn't hit Y, the mercenaries would breach the server, see the real state of my finances, which were far from ruined, realize my entire bankruptcy act was a deliberate defense mechanism, and they would take Ilara knowing I still had substantial, accessible capital to trade for her. The woman with the silver hair, a governor, clearly, was using Ilara's dream as the ultimate bargaining chip. She wasn't a common kidnapper. She was an insider, using corporate leverage disguised as a violent abduction. I looked back at the drone outside, its red eye unwavering. "You think I'm protecting money," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "You think this is about the Sinclair deal." I didn't hit Y. I deleted the confirm deployment prompt. Instead, I rapidly opened a new, highly restricted terminal window, one tied only to the specialized communications channel for my actual security team, the Phantom Group, who were now converging on Sarah Jenkins' house based on my earlier emergency signal. I typed one final cryptic message, knowing it would be received by my lead operative, Marcus, within seconds. Scorched earth is a lie. Initiate Phase 4, the truth. Phase 4 wasn't about data leaks. It was about revealing the reason for the data leak. I leaned back, drawing a deep, shuddering breath as the server door finally ripped inward with a deafening screech of torn metal. The two mercenaries rushed in, weapons raised, expecting a fight over flashing screens. They found me sitting calmly at the auxiliary terminal, my hands resting flat on the desk beside the operational burner phone. "It's done," I said to them, not raising my voice above a conversational level. "The transfer is locked. Tell your employer they won the battle, but they just lost the war." The leading mercenary hesitated, clearly confused by my sudden surrender. "What transfer? Where's the data?" "The data is irrelevant now," I said, picking up the burner phone. I didn't dial the distorted number. Instead, I pressed the speaker button on the device and then activated the external microphone I had hardwired into the study just in case of this exact confrontation. "Marcus," I said clearly into the external mic, knowing Ilara, wherever she was, would likely hear a recording of this later if they were monitoring her communications. The immediate threat is neutralized. The kidnappers are inside the study. But tell the authorities, tell the press, everything. Tell them about the hidden accounts in the Cayman Islands. Tell them that I, Mark Harrison, intentionally funneled the entirety of my legitimate corporate earnings for the last 2 years, including the initial Sinclair investment, into offshore accounts under the names of the Juilliard Board of Governors. The mercenaries froze. Their faces, visible now through the thinning dust cloud, betrayed dawning horror. The only reason I staged the bankruptcy, I continued, my voice gaining strength, finally speaking the truth that had protected her, was to make sure the Board of Governors couldn't claim ignorance when the full audit hits. I didn't pull Alara's funding. They did months ago and used the money to prop up failing endowments. I let them think I was ruined so they wouldn't realize I was preparing to expose their entire corrupt financial structure. I didn't try to save my money, Marcus. I turned it into the weapon they needed to keep Alara safe and secure her real future. The mercenaries dropped their weapons. They weren't interested in taking me hostage anymore. They were suddenly facing federal indictment based on the imminent audit I had just triggered by exposing the real connection. At that moment, a new, calm voice cut through the electronic chaos. The voice of my phantom team leader, Marcus, on a secured line I had patched through to the study speaker. Mark, we have eyes on Alara. She's at the private residence of Governor Davies. She's fine, but she's about to sign an NDA in exchange for a full scholarship. We're moving in now. Don't move in, Marcus, I commanded, looking directly at the downed mercenaries. Tell them to stand down. Tell Governor Davies that her debt has been paid. Tell her that her compliance is no longer necessary. I pressed the final button on the auxiliary terminal. It wasn't the data wipe. It was a single encrypted notification sent directly to the email address of the governor of New York, detailing the entirety of the financial conspiracy, complete with undeniable evidence pointing to the board's manipulation of Alara's acceptance. A moment later, the burner phone vibrated again. It was the distorted voice, now stripped of its digital modulator, a sharp, educated woman's voice, laced with fury and defeat. "You maniac, you burned everything. She's free. We're pulling out." The line went dead. The drone outside sputtered once and dropped inertly into the overgrown ivy. I walked to the ruined server rack, placing my hand on the still warm titanium. The entire facade had collapsed, but the outcome was secured. My business legacy was vaporized, but Alara's future wasn't just safe. It was guaranteed by people terrified of the fallout. Moments later, the front door, now barely hanging by its hinges, was shouldered open again, not by mercenaries but by 2 uniformed police officers and Marcus. Marcus rushed to me. "Mark, are you hurt? Where is Alara?" I managed a weak smile, the adrenaline finally receding, leaving only bone-deep exhaustion. "She's exactly where she always deserved to be, Marcus, at Juilliard. I just had to make sure the people who could afford to give it to her couldn't afford to take it back." I gestured toward the broken door where the first rays of dawn were finally breaking through the smoke-filled air. "Now, let's talk to the authorities about what they're going to find when they audit the entire Board of Governors."